this is a very special project. In here on the farm where my house is, where I'm sitting, the farm is called Eden. And so this is where our tasting room is, this is where our offices are, this is where I live. So this is the home of Raats Family Wines, but the farm is called Eden. And I had, when I bought the farm, it had Cabernet Sauvignon on, but the previous owner farmed it very commercial. So the soil was that he sprayed everything, all the weeds, he sprayed all the insects, and there was, although it looked very neat, the soil was dead and everything was basically killed. So what I did was, usually people rip up the soil and they put back phosphates and nitrogen and a bit of organic material, and they plant it after 3 months again. But I didn't want to go that route. So I wanted to restore the soil in a natural way. So I got a big bulldozer in to break up the soil. Now at that stage, anywhere in this vineyard, if you took a spade and you hit the ground, it would have bounced off. It was so hard. So we broke up the whole vineyard with a big bulldozer to loosen up the soil. And then I planted triticale, which is a cover crop, which is very high in biomass. We grew it for 1 year, and then we left it and it rot back into the soil, and that started replacing the organic material in the soil. Then the next year I planted lupines, which is a legume, a bean, and that is very high in nitrogen. And then we sowed that, and then we grew it, and then left it, and it basically decomposed back into the soil. And then in the third year we planted oats, which is very high in phosphates. So it took me 3 years with different cover crops to actually restore the natural balance, everything that's been taken away. And then only in 2009, so we started in 2005, and only in 2009 we planted for the first time. And at that stage, you could take your hand and stick it into the soil up to your wrist anywhere in the vineyard. The earthworms came back. It was just unbelievable how the soil recovered and became natural organisms came back, and it was just absolutely fantastic. So in 2009, we planted Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc. The whole vineyard is only 0.8 hectares big. 0.6 of that, of a hectare, is Chenin Blanc. And the clone of Chenin Blanc I planted was in the 60s. They brought into South Africa a clone called Montpellier. It came from Montpellier in France. And as they started planting it, they realized that this was very different to the other Chenin Blanc clones in South Africa, because it gave a very small berry and a loose bunch. So the yield was very low, but the berries were small, and it didn't rot because it had this very loose bunches, but it gave very low yield. Now you must remember, in the 70s and the 80s, the whole drive of our industry was to produce volume, not just South Africa, across the world. So this clone fell out of favor, and people that planted it ripped it out, and eventually the nurseries didn't carry this Montpellier clone of Chenin Blanc anymore because nobody asked for it. And then I wanted to plant this Montpellier clone, and then we found the mother block. That means the original block that they used to multiply, to supply the nurserymen. And I contacted the guy that had the mother block, and he said, I can come just take it, because he's going to rip it out the next day. So very early in the morning, we went through to a valley called Ney. It's about 120 kilometers from here. And we collected this Montpellier clone from planting material from the mother block. And we brought it back. And then in 2000, that was in 2008, 2009, we planted it. So Eden has become, by default, the mother block for Montpellier clone in South Africa. So what I also did is, when we planted the vines, I planted it high density. High density means 1 meter by 1.2 meters, so there's no tractor row, 8,000 vines per hectare. And up till today, it is the only high-density single vineyard release that you currently can find in South Africa. It was the first for Africa, the first for South Africa, and still today the only high-density single vineyard that you will find from South Africa. So it has become the mother block for the Montpellier clone. A lot of people come collect material from us to also plant it, including ourselves. So, and the farm is called Eden, Garden of Eden in a way. So in a lot of ways, this project has become, actually grew into its name Eden, in the sense that everything that I mentioned and how we restored the soil naturally. And so Eden then refers to the name of the vineyard. High density, meaning that I planted it 8,000 vines per hectare, high density planting, and single vineyard, obviously, it only comes from those 0.6 hectares. So we produce very small amount of this, depends on the vintage, anything from round about, I would say, average about 1,200 bottles. So it's extremely small production. And what we do with this wine is that because of the high density planting, obviously the logic behind it is that you compete, the vineyards, when you plant them close to each other, the root systems compete with each other. So when you plant vineyard far apart, the root system has a lot of soil to develop in, and then they grow more vigorously. But when you plant them close to each other, the root systems compete, and therefore they give smaller berries, lower yield, with obviously higher quality. And on top of that, we have the Montpellier clone, which already has a small berry and a loose bunch. So even in this young vineyard, relatively young, we get 2.5 tons per hectare if we're lucky. So, and I think you'll see it in the wine as well. When you smell the wine, there's almost like a slight tropical note, and that is typical of the Montpellier clone, but it also has that typical white pear, yellow apple, quince fruit on the nose. It has this lovely whetstone minerality. And I must also add that this whole Eden farm is decomposed dolomite granite. So the wines in general have that lovely minerality that you find in this granite soils. And obviously there's a high percentage of dolomite in the soil, so you get great acidity. And but I think the beauty of the wine is that beautiful weight and texture and the length of this wine, the concentration. If you swallow it, that aftertaste just goes on and on and on. It's almost, if you close your eyes, it's almost like a red wine. It just sort of, got a very long finish. It has, this is only 2014 was the first vintage we released. And they all have been given Platter 5-star. It's been before rated in the top 20 white wines in the world. In the UK, I don't want to tell you all these things, because ultimately I think what's important is the wine and how it shows where it comes from, and that it tells a story of decomposed dolomite, granite soil, high density planting, a unique clone, and something just really exceptional and a first for South Africa. When we started this project, I couldn't really have gone to anybody in South Africa to say, how did it work, or how close did you plant? There was no ways. We really had to be pioneers when we planted this vineyard. And looking back now, 12 years later, the results is now in the glass. And I must say, this is a very rewarding project for me, because it was quality by design. We designed everything. We selected the rootstock, we selected the clone, we just selected the trellis system, and everything that we did was with a focus to one day produce ultra premium quality wine from it. And I mean, you can be the judge, it's in your glass, but these are the facts, and this is how the story to produce this very unique wine.